This is the issue we've been discussing. It's critical we address it now.
'08 In this small American town, a humble mechanic saves a CEO's daughter and changes his life forever. A story of courage, kindness, and destiny. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. Jake lived in the same small American town for most of his 32 years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where opportunities seemed to stall out like old cars left 0 hours 0 minutes and 34 seconds to 0 hours 1 minute and 44 seconds on the roadside. He worked at a run-down garage on the edge of town, fixing beat-up trucks, worn-out sedans, and the occasional sports car that passed through on its last leg. The pay was modest, barely enough to keep food in his fridge, but his heart was in the work. He found dignity in restoring what was broken. Every morning, Jake would wipe the grease from his hands with a rag that never seemed clean no matter how much he washed it, and then push himself through another long day under the hood. The garage smelled of oil, 0 hours 1 minute and 9 seconds to 0 hours 2 minutes and 17 seconds gasoline, and rust, a scent that clung to him even outside of work. His boss, a man named Clyde, didn't care much for him, often belittling his efforts and cutting his hours whenever business slowed. Still, Jake endured because what else was there for a man with no degree, no family left, and no way out of town? It was on a stormy evening in late autumn that Jake's life veered sharply in a new direction. Rain lashed against the cracked windows of the garage as he locked up for the night, his jacket 0 hours 1 minute and 43 seconds to 0 hours 2 minutes and 51 seconds already damp from the leaking roof. The streets were slick and shiny under the glow of old street lamps. It the kind of night that made most folks hurry home. But as Jake walked down the road toward his small rented apartment, a sound stopped him cold. It was a high-pitched scream, frantic, desperate, cutting through the rain like a knife. At first, he thought it might have been the wind, but then he heard it again, clearer this time, a child's voice calling for help. Jake's boots splashed against puddles as 0 hours 2 minutes and 17 seconds to 0 hours 3 minutes and 24 seconds he rushed toward the sound. He rounded a corner and froze. Parked awkwardly near the curb was an old car, smoke billowing from under its hood. Through the fogged-up windows, he could just barely make out the figure of a little girl trapped inside, pounding on the glass with her small hands. Panic surged in Jake's chest, but instinct quickly took over. He rushed to the driver's side, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The locks were jammed, and the smoke inside was getting thicker by the 0 hours 2 minutes and 50 seconds to 0 hours 3 minutes and 56 seconds second. The girl's cries grew weaker, muffled by the glass. Her face stray with tears and terror. Jake didn't waste another moment. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around his fist, and smashed the side window with all his strength. Glass shattered outward, and the girl shrieked before realizing help had come. Reaching in, Jake unlocked the door and pulled her out into the rain. The child clung to him as though he were her only lifeline. Coughing violently against his chest, Jake could feel her 0 hours 3 minutes and 23 seconds to 0 hours 4 minutes and 28 seconds tiny frame, trembling, her hair damp and plastered to her face. He whispered reassurances, though he wasn't even sure she could hear him over the storm. The smell of burning oil filled the air as the smoke thickened behind them. Jake carried her several feet away from the car just as it let out a sharp hiss, threatening to catch fire. His heart raced as he held her close, shielding her from the chaos. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the scene. A patrol car skidded to a 0 hours 3 minutes and 56 seconds to 0 hours 5 minutes and 6 seconds stop, followed by an ambulance. Paramedics rushed forward, prying the girl from Jake's arms to check her breathing. She was shaken, coughing hard, but alive. Relief washed over him as he watched them wrap her in a blanket, their calm voices soothing her tears. Jake, soaked to the bone, stood silently nearby, his hands still bleeding from the glass. He wasn't used to being noticed, and yet all eyes seemed to be on him in that moment. That was when another vehicle screeched to a halt nearby. A sleek black town car that 0 hours 4 minutes and 31 seconds to 0 hours 5 minutes and 38 seconds looked out of place on the wet, grimy street. The door flew open, and a tall woman stepped out in high heels that splashed into the puddles. She was striking with sharp features and an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. Her name was Victoria, though Jake wouldn't learn that until later. Right then, she was only a mother desperate for her child. She rushed past the officers, calling out frantically, her voice breaking with emotion. "Emily," the woman cried, Pushing past 0 hours 5 minutes and 5 seconds to 0 hours 6 minutes and 16 seconds the paramedics until she saw the girl wrapped in a blanket. Relief flooded her face as she dropped to her knees, clutching her daughter tightly. Tears streamed down both their faces, as they held onto each other, the storm raging around them as though it had been waiting for this reunion. Jake stood off to the side, his chest rising and falling, watching the raw moment unfold. He could have walked away then, disappearing back into the shadows as he always did, but something held him still. Victoria's eyes lifted, scanning 0 hours 5 minutes and 40 seconds to 0 hours 6 minutes and 45 seconds the crowd until they landed on Jake. For a moment the world seemed to still. She saw the torn jacket, the cuts on his knuckles, the soot smeared across his cheeks. He looked nothing like the men she dealt with daily in her world of corporate power and high-rise offices. But in her eyes, he was more than all of them put together. He had saved her daughter. She rose to her feet, still holding Emily's hand, and walked toward him, her expression both fierce and grateful. You saved my little girl. 0 hours 6 minutes and 13 seconds to 0 hours 7 minutes and 10 seconds she said, her voice trembling as she looked him over. What's your name? Jake, he replied simply, shifting awkwardly under her gaze. He wasn't used to attention, let alone from someone like her. Jake, she repeated as though committing it to memory. I don't know how to thank you. The paramedics interrupted, insisting on taking Emily to the hospital for observation. Victoria climbed into the ambulance with her daughter, but before 0 hours 6 minutes and 41 seconds to 0 hours 7 minutes and 46 seconds the doors closed. She looked back at Jake one last time. Their eyes met in a silent exchange of gratitude and something else neither could name. Jake stood alone in the rain as the sirens wailed and the ambulance pulled away, wondering why. This night felt like the start of something far bigger than he could imagine. As he walked back toward his apartment, his mind kept returning to Emily's terrified face, to the weight of her small body in his arms, and to the powerful presence of the woman who 0 hours 7 minutes and 13 seconds to 0 hours 8 minutes and 17 seconds had looked at him like no one ever had before. He didn't know it yet, but the storm that night had done more than flood the streets. It had washed away the barriers between two worlds, setting the stage for a story that was only beginning. The morning after the rescue, Jake expected life to return to normal with the same greasy work in the same dim garage. But it didn't. By the time he reached the shop, the whole town was buzzing. Newspapers carried the story and the local news station had played 0 hours 7 minutes and 45 seconds to 0 hours 8 minutes and 53 seconds the footage of Emily being carried out of the smoking car by a mechanic with torn clothes and bleeding hands. The headline read, "Mechanic Saves CEO's Daughter from Burning Car." Jake hadn't even known her mother was a CEO, let alone that his actions would draw so much attention. Customers stopped by the garage, not for repairs, but to shake Jake's hand or to simply see the man they had watched on television. For a brief moment, he felt pride, though it was quickly smothered by the scowl of 0 hours 8 minutes and 19 seconds to 0 hours 9 minutes and 29 seconds his employer, Clyde. The older man watched from his office, his face red with irritation rather than admiration. To Clyde, Jake's sudden fame wasn't an honor. It was a nuisance. He didn't like the attention on someone else, especially not an employee he had always considered disposable. By lunchtime, Clyde called Jake into his cramped office. The blinds were half broken. The smell of stale cigarettes thickened the air. Jake expected maybe a warning about interviews or leaving work briefly, but 0 hours 8 minutes and 54 seconds to 0 hours 9 minutes and 57 seconds what he heard instead felt like a punch to the gut. Clyde leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said flatly, "You left early yesterday. You abandoned your shift. That's grounds for termination." Jake stared at him in disbelief. He had saved a child's life, and somehow that was being twisted into negligence. "Are you serious?" Jake asked, his voice low with disbelief, his hands tightened on the strap of his tool belt. "Dead serious," Clyde snapped. I 0 hours 9 minutes and 25 seconds to 0 hours 10 minutes and 33 seconds don't need heroes in my shop. I need men who stay and do their job. You're fired. Pack up your junk and get out. The words stung deeper than Jake expected. It wasn't that he loved the job. He hadn't for years, but it was all he had. With slow, defeated steps, he gathered his small box of tools, the same ones he had carried since he was 18. Standing outside the garage, the rain from the night before had left the air damp and cold, the pavement slick under his boots. He felt the eyes of his 0 hours 9 minutes and 59 seconds to 0 hours 11 minutes and 8 seconds coworkers on him through the dusty windows, but none came out to speak. As Jake walked away with the box in his arms, the weight felt heavier than usual. He wasn't just carrying wrenches and sockets. He was carrying the last shred of security he had. His apartment rent was already overdue and without steady work. He wondered how long before he was forced onto the streets. He had saved someone's life, but in the cruelest twist he was the one being punished. Still, he kept his head low and trudged 0 hours 10 minutes and 33 seconds to 0 hours 11 minutes and 38 seconds home, trying to push back the bitterness that threatened to consume him. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria was still replaying the previous night in her mind. She hadn't slept much, spending most of the night sitting by Emily's hospital bed, watching her daughter breathe peacefully. The doctors had reassured her that Emily was unharmed, aside from smoke inhalation. But the terror of what could have happened kept gnawing at her. Each time she looked at Emily's small hands, she remembered how Jake had carried her with 0 hours 11 minutes and 6 seconds to 0 hours 12 minutes and 15 seconds, such care, not as a stranger, but as though she were his own. Gratitude wasn't a strong enough word for what she felt when her assistant brought her the morning paper. Victoria was stunned to see Jake's name plastered beneath the photo. The story painted him as a quiet hero, a man who risked everything without hesitation, but as she read further, another detail caught her attention. Jake had lost his job. Her expression darkened. She knew the type of men like Clyde, selfish and opportunistic, always crushing the good. 0 hours 11 minutes and 40 seconds to 0 hours 12 minutes and 50 seconds wants to keep control. Anger bubbled inside her, sharper than she had felt in years. No one who saved her daughter deserved such treatment. Without hesitation, she had her driver take her to the address she managed to obtain. Through a police contact, the apartment building was nothing like the polished glass towers she was used to. It was a worn-down red brick structure with cracked steps and flickering hallway lights. Victoria adjusted her coat, her heels clicking on the uneven pavement as she approached. This wasn't her world. 0 hours 12 minutes and 15 seconds to 0 hours 13 minutes and 23 seconds, but she didn't care. She was here for Jake, and she wasn't leaving until she spoke to him face to face. Jake was sitting at his small kitchen table, staring at the unopened bills stacked in front of him when the knock came. At first he thought it was his landlord demanding rent again, but when he opened the door he froze. Standing there, framed by the dim hallway light, was Victoria herself, immaculate and commanding, as though she had stepped out of another reality. Her presence filled the tiny apartment doorway, her 0 hours 12 minutes and 49 seconds to 0 hours 13 minutes and 55 seconds eyes locking onto his with determination. "May I come in?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't really asking. Jake stepped aside awkwardly, motioning her in. The room was embarrassingly small, the wallpaper peeling, the furniture mismatched and old. He wished he could make it look better, but there was no hiding the truth of his life. Victoria didn't comment on the surroundings. Instead, she studied Jake closely. His hands were rough, scarred from years of labor, his 0 hours 13 minutes and 22 seconds to 0 hours 14 minutes and 29 seconds shirt still smudged with grease from the day before. Yet his eyes carried a quiet strength that moved her more than she expected. "I heard what happened at your shop," said her voice tight with anger. "You saved my daughter's life and they fired you for it. That's unacceptable." Jake shrugged, though his jaw clenched. "Doesn't matter. It was just a job. I'll find something else." Victoria stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "No, Jake, it does matter. A man like you deserves more than scraps. You deserve respect. 00 13:56 to 0 hours 15 minutes and 8 seconds. You deserve opportunity." For the first time in years, Jake felt seen. Not as a lowly mechanic, not as a burden, but as someone worthy. He didn't know what Victoria had in mind, but her words stirred something in him he thought had long died. Hope. And as she sat across from him in that small kitchen, her presence almost too large for the room, Jake realized his life had shifted again. The night he saved Emily had opened a door, and now Victoria was determined to make sure he walked through it. A week after the rescue, 0 hours 14 minutes and 32 seconds to 0 hours 15 minutes and 40 seconds, life felt like it had slowed into a quiet rhythm for Jake. He had been searching for odd jobs, trying to scrape together enough money to make ends meet, but nothing substantial came through. Still, he wasn't bitter. Every night he thought of Emily's smile and the way she had hugged him when the paramedics confirmed she was safe. That memory was enough to push him forward. Even when the future seemed uncertain, then one afternoon he received an unexpected call from Victoria herself, inviting him to 0 hours 15 minutes and 6 seconds to 0 hours 16 minutes and 12 seconds meet her and Emily. Jake almost didn't believe it at first. Why would a woman of her stature, a CEO with empires to run, take the time to call him personally? But her voice carried sincerity. She asked politely but firmly, leaving no room for him to decline. "There's something I'd like you to see," she said. "And I want Emily to be there, too." Nervous but curious, Jake agreed, not knowing what lay ahead. On the day of the meeting, he wore his cleanest shirt, though it still carried faint grease stains, and tried to 0 hours 15 minutes and 39 seconds to 0 hours 16 minutes and 50 seconds prepare himself. Victoria's car pulled up to the curb outside his apartment, right on time. It wasn't just any car. It was a sleek black luxury sedan, gleaming under the sunlight. Emily waved from the back seat with a smile that warmed Jake instantly. But when he slid into the passenger seat, he felt out of place, his rough hands resting awkwardly on his knees. Victoria, elegant as always, greeted him with a small nod, her eyes holding a spark of excitement. "You've done enough walking alone, Jake." 0 hours 16 minutes and 14 seconds to 0 hours 17 minutes and 20 seconds, she said softly. "Today we take a different path." The drive was silent at first, though Emily filled the quiet with her chatter. She told Jake about school, about how her classmates kept asking her about the hero mechanic, and how proud she felt to say she knew him. Jake listened with a shy smile, humbled by her admiration. Victoria watched him from the corner of her eye, noticing the way his posture remained stiff, as though he didn't quite belong in their world. She was determined to show him 0 hours 16 minutes and 47 seconds to 0 hours 17 minutes and 56 seconds otherwise. Finally, after nearly half an hour, the car slowed, turning down a road lined with freshly planted trees. When the car stopped, Jake looked out the window in confusion. They weren't at a restaurant nor a hotel, instead standing. Before them was a building so pristine it almost gleamed, a brand new auto repair shop, larger than any he had ever worked in. Its glass windows reflected the sun, and the sign above the entrance caught his breath. Jake's Garage, written in bold, shining 0 hours 17 minutes and 22 seconds to 0 hours 18 minutes and 30 seconds letters. For a long moment he couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He turned to Victoria, his voice breaking. What is this?" Victoria stepped out of the car gracefully, gesturing toward the building with a smile. Emily bounced beside her, her hand gripping Jake's tightly. "This," Victoria said, "is your new beginning. You saved my daughter's life, Jake. The world may have ignored you, but I won't. You deserve more than 0 hours 17 minutes and 56 seconds to 0 hours 19 minutes and 8 seconds, a paycheck that barely keeps you alive. You deserve to build something of your own, so I built this for you." Her words hung in the air, powerful and undeniable, filling Jake with an emotion so overwhelming he could hardly stand. Tears burned his eyes though he blinked them back. He had spent years believing he wasn't worth more than being someone's employee, more than scraping by. And here standing before him was proof that someone believed differently. His hands shook as Victoria handed him a 0 hours 18 minutes and 32 seconds to 0 hours 19 minutes and 38 seconds small set of keys. "They're yours," she said softly. "This place belongs to you now." Emily, her face glowing with excitement, threw her arms around him. "You are my hero," she whispered. The embrace broke the last of his restraint, and tears rolled freely down his cheeks, falling onto Emily's hair. Together, they walked through the shining doors. Inside, the shop smelled of fresh paint and new machinery. The floors were spotless. The tools gleamed in neat rows, and every corner spoke of 0 hours 19 minutes and 5 seconds to 0 hours 20 minutes and 10 seconds opportunity. Jake ran his hand over one of the workbenches, feeling the smooth surface beneath his calloused fingers. He had never seen equipment this advanced in his life, and it was all his. He turned to Victoria, still struggling to speak. I don't know what to say. I don't deserve this." Victoria stepped closer, her voice firm but kind. "Jake, you deserve it more than anyone." Word of the new garage spread quickly through town. People who had once passed Jake by without a glance now stopped to 0 hours 19 minutes and 38 seconds to 0 hours 20 minutes and 44 seconds shake his hand, eager to bring their cars to the new shop. They didn't just see him as a mechanic anymore. They saw him as a man who had proven his worth. Not only through his skills, but through his courage and heart. The first week the garage was overflowing with customers, each eager to support him. Jake worked tirelessly, but this time it wasn't for survival. It was for pride, for building something that finally belonged to him. Emily often stopped by after school, running around the shop 0 hours 20 minutes and 11 seconds to 0 hours 21 minutes and 18 seconds like it was a second home. She loved handing him tools, learning the names of the machines, and watching her hero fix cars with skillful hands. Victoria visited too, sometimes standing quietly in the corner, watching as Jake's dream came alive. Though she didn't say much, her presence carried unspoken encouragement, and Jake felt it deeply. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone in the fight. He had people who believed in him, people who wanted him to rise. At night, when the garage 0 hours 20 minutes and 44 seconds to 0 hours 22 minutes and 3 seconds lights dimmed and the town grew quiet, Jake often stood outside staring up at the sign. Jake's Garage. The words didn't just represent a business. They represented his journey. From the despair of losing his job to the miracle of saving Emily, from being overlooked to being lifted up, his life had transformed completely. And though he never sought recognition, he had found something greater: respect, belonging, and a future. Every time he locked up for the night, he whispered a silent thank you to life, to fate, and most of 0 hours 21 minutes and 23 seconds to 0 hours 22 minutes and 32 seconds all to Victoria and Emily. Jake's story became more than a headline. It became a legend in the town. Parents told their children about the mechanic W.H.